Hey, everybody, this is Perch. Well, it's time to take a look at Fear itself. This was a seven-issue event brought in by Marvel in 2011. We'll get to what this event was like in a moment. But like a lot of events at the time, Marvel was on a bit of a roll. You see, they had just come off of three pretty powerful events that had done fairly major things for the sales. And at this point, Marvel was really thinking, hey, the surefire win to make sure we win in unit and dollar sales every single year was to put on an event with tons of crossovers, lots of ramifications that may or may not be long lasting, usually not. And so in 2011, that event was Fear itself. So the creative team behind this was a gentleman by the name of Matt Fraction, who was growing in popularity in Marvel at the time and giving bigger and bigger profile assignments. Fear itself was to be his biggest. He was currently on Iron Man and Thor at the time, and they paired him with a pretty amazing artist, Stuart Immonen, who had also been doing a lot of pretty cool Marvel things. He'd worked back with Warren Ellis in a couple of events, and including Next Wave, a fan favorite. And he was also one of these creators who had a nice, clean style and was really looking to get a higher profile. And you can't blame him because basically Immelman's art was pretty incredible. If you take a look at what this event brought us, pretty big widescreen action, nice renderings of the characters. He had a really pretty amazing talent with a lot of the Marvel characters. It just made everyone look great. So, how could you go wrong? You're coming off of Secret Invasion. After Secret Invasion, by the way, there was a lengthy stretch called Dark Reign, and then you had Siege. And so, really, Marvel could go to do no wrong. Now, they had Brian Michael Bendis do two of those big events. Had Mike Miller do Civil War, of course. So, Matt Fraction came in. So, what was Fear itself really about? Well, in a nutshell, you basically have this character, Sin, who's the daughter of the Red Skull, and she manages to get Cole Borson, Odin's brother, freed from imprisonment on Earth. He immediately starts running amok. They launch these hammers down. A number of heroes and villains get them, transform into kind of badass Asgardian gods. They proceed to kill Bucky, who was, wearing the Captain America costume at the time. But this got the Marvel Universe characters to get their own mystical Asgard armor, and they go and they kick ass, but at a huge cost as Thor has to ultimately sacrifice himself to save the day. All right. So, like we mentioned earlier, this event had seven issues starting I said in 2011. It wrapped up in 2011. But to be really fair about it, we had a kind of an issue zero, a prelude called Book of the Skull. This is where Sin finds kind of the first signs of the hammer and Cole and gets this whole event going. And then the event kind of wraps up with not just one, but three postscript issues dealing with three big ramifications: the death of Bucky, the death of Thor, and then in Iron Man, there's a pretty big event. Now, that was written by Fraction itself, but basically the Grey Gargoyle, who had been a lower tier villain, got these mystical, hammer god powers and basically wipes out the city of Paris. These issues were somewhat notorious as each one really undid everything that happened during the event itself. And it happened immediately. People were used to having events kind of take place and it would take a year or two before, the characters who had a mysterious death might start showing signs of coming back to life. It took Hawkeye quite a while after House of M. But in this one, as soon as the event ended, they immediately revealed Bucky wasn't actually dead, Thor wasn't actually dead, and all those people who died in Paris are just fine. So, let's get to it. We waited long enough. Let's actually take a look at how the numbers existed. But before we do that, more stalling, just to remind you, the event immediately previous was Secret Invasion. And this is basically how Secret Invasion looked. Started out strong, fell. This is pretty common of events, but still, your first issue is hitting there at 250,000 copies for Secret Invasion number one. Its low point was where it ended, which was 152,000 copies. So, all in all, this is an event that comic companies would love to have today. And then if we take a look at the other one, at Civil War, well, Civil War was kind of a crazy anomaly. If you look at those numbers, they bounced around. And Civil War basically started at 260,000. It dropped to 250. it jumped to just under 300,000. It ended at 265. So it did have an up and down kind of thing. A lot of different reasons for that, but these numbers were even more impressive. But the really cool thing, and why Marvel was really getting into events at the time, was because of this. While Civil War certainly had massive numbers, the rest of the Marvel titles actually grew. Now, this is a pretty long horizontal graph. You look at it from basically 2005 to 2008, but it gives you a bigger range picture of what happened. And right there, the red, that's when Civil War occurred in 2006 to right 2007. So, what happened during this time period? Well, Marvel Comics were averaging about 72,000 copies sold before Civil War, and they grew to 94,000 copies sold after Civil War, basically during this event, and they held it. It was basically a 31% trend increase of nearly all of the Marvel titles. Not everybody benefited, but and some benefited more, some benefited less. On average, 31% increase in Marvel titles at the time. This is a massive deal. It's one thing to sell an event, it's another thing to raise your entire line. Secret Invasion did a bit of this, but now let's see how things go for Fear itself. So again, looking at the full range, including that issue 0, it was issue 1 actually, Book of the Skull, but the Prelude issue all the way through the epilogue, all of these comics that you see on the screen right now, we're basically getting this. Okay, so you can already start to see the graph and see a little bit of where it's going. But let's take a look. So the Prelude issue, Book of the Skull, opened at 62,000 copies. Low for sure compared to what had happened before, but not completely unusual. I mean, it wasn't tied to the event. It's called Book of the Skull. It had the little branding at the top, but the event itself opened at 128,000. Now, this was basically half of what Secret Invasion opened with earlier. And this is alarm bells, right? Your number one issue, which is going to be your top, opens at 128,000. It immediately drops to 96,000, a pretty steep drop. Now, I guess the good news, the silver lining is it really doesn't drop too much beyond this. Issue 3 is at 95,000, issue 4 is at 93,000, issue 5 is at 90,000, and this would ultimately be the low watermark of the core event, before issue 6 jumped up a little bit to 93, and then issue 7 to 95. Now, if you've been watching these videos, you know that jumping up is a little bit unusual. There's a little bit of a reason for that we're going to get into in a minute. I don't believe it had anything to do with momentum building in the comic, rather things that were going on in comics at the time. But then let's take a look at those 3 epilogue issues. So this, which kind of is, bodes ill for how it's going to do for the rest of the line. The first epilogue issue came in at 60,000. This was revealing that Bucky Cap was not dead. The second issue revealed that Thor wasn't dead, dropped to 58, and then Iron Man dropped to 54. And so basically, even of these 3 epilogue issues that happened kind of one right after another, that was a drop of about 6,000 copies just from, the beginning to the end of the epilogue series. But it is ominous that this event came out and stirred so little larger interest that we basically got a pretty steep, a 35,000 copy drop between the end of the event and the things that were immediately following it. All in all, what does this mean? Well, if we look at this chart again, we look at the first issue, we look at the last issue of the series, we had, about a 26% decrease from issue 1 to issue 7. Now, by the way, this was bad at the time. And it was bad compared to some of the other things you've seen. I mean, Secret Invasion did start big with issue 1, but anyway, not the current events and current because of the variance and speculation and everything else. These issue 1s are much higher than the issues that follow. So this isn't necessarily a catastrophic number. Um, the drop from issue number 1 to number 2 was a 25% decrease. Okay. So let's look at this series again and try and analyze a little bit what happened here because issues 2 through 7 are a little bit of an anomaly. It's actually is very flat. Now you can say this is just the audience finding itself, but to really understand a little bit what was going on at the time and maybe a little bit where Marvel shot itself in the foot during the course of the event, we have to do a couple things. First of all, let's go ahead and wipe this out and let's bring it back again. But this time, let's take out that 0 issues, epilogue issues. Now we're just seeing 1 through 7. We see very clearly what happened. It kicked off, dropped up 20%, and then flattened. All right. So to really get a picture, though, we're going to have to give ourselves a little bit of room. So let's do that. Okay, let's bring this thing back up with a little bit of headroom. Okay, now you see Fear itself, and this will give you a little bit of a sense of what was going on in the comic industry at the time. So the problem with Fear itself is that Marvel had a problem of glutting too many things in the stores at one time from itself. And in issue 3, Fear itself, this is the big event Marvel's trying to really sell things on. And keep in mind, the Avengers are in this, the X-Men are in this, Captain America's in this, Spider-Man is in this. What happens at issue 3? Well, the death of Spider-Man over in the Ultimate Universe comes out, and that sells 159,000 copies. So, number one, that's doing better than the actual Fear itself event, just this one copy. It's now competing with its own line. And to make matters worse, the next month, you get the kickoff of Spider Island at 135,000 copies. Captain America #1 relaunch came out at the same time, too, right around issue 4. And that was also a pretty bad scheduling conflict because you just killed Bucky, and then you have a brand new Captain America #1 where he's off doing his own adventure from the artist of Civil War, I believe. I believe Niven was on that. But you're doing this right in the middle of this event, which is threatening that Captain America is dead. So not the best scheduling timing. But the real problem for this event and Marvel in general is this. Well, right around issue 5, it's August, I believe, at this time, 2011. Out comes Justice League #1, and a month later, out comes Batman #1 and Action Comics #1. This, of course, was the New 52. The New 52 kicks off at this time period, and DC basically dominates the sales charts after this moment. Now, remember earlier I said that 6 and 7 bumped up a little bit, and that was a little unusual? Highly likely it bumped up a little bit because DC brought a bunch of extra people into the shops. I don't think it had anything to do with this event having something special that went on in issue 6. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that you had more interest in comic books because of the big advertising and push the New 52 got. Of course, this wasn't good news for Marvel overall because DC would continue to dominate the sales charts for quite a while. So, all this considered, hey, if it's 2025 and you've got an event coming out that's selling, right close to 100,000 copies, you're probably taking the win. Well, at the time, Fear itself was considered a pretty big disaster. Now, why? Well, I want to remind you of this picture again. Civil War, several years earlier, 5 years earlier, basically gave us a lift to the overall line. Secret Invasion did the same, as did the following brand imprint Dark Reign. So, how did Fear itself do for the rest of the Marvel comics? Well, what's ominous a little bit are the tie-ins itself. Now, nobody expects Hulk versus Dracula to do well, but 17,000 copies for this, it sucks. There's just no way around it. Wolverine, 30,000 copies. X-Force, Uncanny X-Force no less, which was red hot at the time, 39,000 copies for its big tie-in. Fear itself Spider-Man, 34,000. Fear itself Deadpool, doing a absolutely stupid MC Hammer thing, 28,000. These were the core tie-in titles. These numbers are bad. Even by today's standards, they're bad. 2011 standards, they're very catastrophic. So what ultimately happened to the line? Well, first of all, the special event tie-ins were 63% decreased from similar titles during Civil War. This is this is a massive problem. So what I mean by special tie-ins are, I mean things that are branded, in this case, Fear itself. With Civil War, we had Front Lines, we had a couple Civil War named titles. I mean, they didn't do amazing, but they did, 63% better, which is a lot. Now, how about the rest of the line? Remember, basically for Civil War, the Marvel line had a 31% increase during the event for all of their titles. Well, during Fear itself, the ongoing titles actually saw a 29% decrease.
And if you don't want to read them, don't read them.
Meaning, Civil War went up, Fear itself went down. And this ultimately hurt their line. And this started to kick in before the New 52. And the New 52 just basically put an extra bullet in things. So, all in all, Fear itself was a pretty bad event for the line in general. Now, you can make a lot of comments here. Creators were leaving, things were turning over, tides were changing, you had a bunch of turnover. So, sure, Marvel was about to go headfirst into the all new Marvel Now era. And, that wasn't the most popular time for them. But all things considered, That's not what you want out of a big event. Events are meant to lift up everything and make some money in the process. So, what happened to Matt Fraction after this? Well, he did wrap up his Iron Man and Thor runs that were going on at the time, and he would go off to do Fantastic Four, Fantastic Foe, or the Fantastic Force. What was this? The Fantastic Force is not right. I can't remember. This bad on me for forgetting this title. But anyway, you had these two titles run side by side. Love the Mike Allred art, by the way. And then he also did Hawkeye, which of course would become his signature work at Marvel. But Fear itself kind of put an end to this rise he was on of being a big event writer who was somebody that they were going to really kind of get behind. Hawkeye was more of an independent thing. Obviously, it pushed kind of what they would do in the Marvel cinematic universe later. But Fear itself kind of put an end to the idea that Fraction was going to be the next big Bendis or the replacement for Miller. Stuart Immonen, on the other hand, he continued to work at Marvel, and he had some pretty high-profile gigs. He did the all-new X-Men with Bendis. He did the all-new Captain America with Rick Remender. And then he went and did a little run on Star Wars, all of which he had a good time. Of course, he did some other work with Mark Miller later, but this was he continues to be an awesome artist. I mean, you can't complain about that. So this is a look at kind of Marvel events at the time, and remember we've had these four. What we're going to get to here fairly soon is the one that would come right after that, where sales did increase, but it also caused a pretty complicated story for the line. When we do this one, AVX, it's an interesting tale because the sales, while good for the event itself, did some pretty weird things to Marvel's line in general. And then, of course, that was followed up by Infinity by Jonathan Hickman, which would kind of later cement him as the go-to guy for Marvel. But therein, dear viewers, if you lasted this long, this is a story of Fear itself. I hope the sales numbers were interesting to you, and thanks for listening. And in this case, there are so many graphs and numbers on here. Thanks for watching.